Greetings to all who have joined. Thank you for joining this international workshop on mobilizing a military force to stop the Gaza genocide. My name is Usman Noor, coordinator of the Protect Palestine community. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to all people who have joined this movement from all over the world. Our community was established by grassroots organizations and activists for Palestine and has now grown to over 8,000 individual members and 90 organizations, all collaborating to mobilize military force to stop the genocide and dismantle the Zionist settler colonial occupation and oppression of the Palestinian people. We reject all forms of colonialism and occupation, and we stand unequivocally against Israel's illegal, expansionist and apartheid project all across historic Palestine. It is obvious to us that Israel is ideologically committed to the extermination of Palestinians. We have been witness to this process for the last century, and we have been observers to the acceleration of this extermination over the last 22 months as Israel has unleashed unrestrained fascist violence throughout both Gaza and the West Bank, but particularly in Gaza, where the worst forms of atrocities known to humankind have been inflicted on Palestinians day after day after day throughout a live-streamed genocide broadcast all over the world. The Israeli state, military, government, parliament, and the vast majority of Israeli society do not see Palestinians as humans. Zionism is and always has been fueled by ethno-nationalist supremacy, fixated on illegal, annexationist, and apartheid violence across Palestine, which, as Palestinian writer Edward Said noted several decades ago, sees no value in Palestinian life or existence and seeks either to kill or expel all of them to make living room for who they deem a superior race. This is an established pattern of imperialist power. It is what European powers did throughout the Americas, Africa, and Asia, throughout centuries of settler colonial domination of indigenous people. The history of these struggles against imperialism teaches us that Israel cannot be negotiated with and must be stopped militarily, because the alternative is to accept an eternal paradigm of servitude by two imperial masters, where the life of the colonized will always be expendable. And yet, calls for military intervention have been largely absent from organized international responses to Israel's genocide of Palestinians. While billions worldwide have engaged in important and necessary forms of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, we have left armed resistance to those Palestinians confronting Israel in Palestine who have been enduring extreme levels of torture, mass rape, assassinations, and slaughter by Israel for decades, or to those outside of Palestine, such as the members of the Axis of Resistance, who have paid and continue to pay the ultimate price for their military resistance to Israel and solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Why have Palestine activists, organized Palestine activists in other parts of the world been largely silent in calling for military intervention? Why have we as citizens of various countries failed to mobilize our own militaries to intervene, to stop the genocide and actually stop them on the ground from the massacres? Has the level of fear of repression from Zionist lobby groups been so severe that we feel afraid to mobilize direct military intervention to stop Israel's live genocide? Or are we perhaps shying away from the military intervention due to the repeated history of NATO's military pursuits across the world that we can't imagine our own form of armed intervention against Israel to stop the extermination? There may be many reasons for this vacuum of organized discussion on this, but today it is clear that armed intervention against Israel is surging. Calls for it are surging as people of all backgrounds and nations become convinced there is no other way to stop the otherwise inevitable completion of Israel's final solution of total annihilation of the Palestinian people. I'm therefore honored to host this excellent panel of speakers to help guide us on how and why to mobilize for a military intervention to stop the Gaza genocide. Each one of them brings abundant insight, experience, and knowledge of the Palestinian cause. I hope you will listen carefully to what they have to say and join us afterwards, as we will switch from webinar mode to meeting mode, where everyone will be able to take the floor and give feedback on the discussion. You will look out for a link to those who are participating to join the meeting room. So for anyone who's registered, you will have already received an email to that link, but we will paste it again in the chat box to those who are attending this webinar. The list of speakers will be taken in the following order: Professor Mazim Kumsia, then Professor Richard Volk, who unfortunately may be delayed because we don't have him yet on the panel, then Craig Mohiber, then Dr. Maung Zani, and finally Susan Abul-Hawa. Professor Mazim Kumsia, you are first. Thank you for joining us. Please take the mic.
Thank you very much for doing this. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to the organizers and of course to the listeners on this. I speak to you from Bethlehem, birthplace of Jesus. My family is a Palestinian Christian family. We have lived here since humans migrated out of Africa some 150,000 years ago to the rest of the world through this bottleneck called Palestine. This is also part of the Fertile Crescent, where humans first developed agriculture, where we first transitioned from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. Hence, the Fertile Crescent is also called the cradle of civilization. This cradle of civilization lived basically in relative harmony, people and nature together, for these thousands of years. The only times we had problems were problems that came to us from outside. For example, in the past few hundred years, really you'd have to go back to the Crusaders to find major ethnic cleansing or genocide happening. And that came to us from Europe, just like this issue came to us from Europe. This genocide that is now being perpetuated and that we are asking for military intervention to stop is a genocide that's unique in world history in many ways. Of course, there has been many genocides in world history, and I'll mention 5 points of uniqueness for this genocide for you to understand why I'm saying it's kind of unique, even though human history is full of genocides and holocausts. Armenian Holocaust, Holocaust in World War II, Rwanda, Congo, etc. What are these 5 unique things? One is that this genocide is not done by a single actor. In the case of Belgium and the Congo, it was basically one actor, King Leopold and his government. In this case, it's many actors, many Western governments that are full partners with the Zionist regime in perpetuating this genocide. What I might do also is say, when I say this uniqueness, I might tell you that there are positive aspects of this uniqueness that helps us and how we can mobilize around that. So for example, here, when I say many actors are involved, that means we have many targets, actors to work on. We have to work on the British government, the American government, the German, French government, etc., Australian government. So it gives us a global outreach of action. The second point that is unique about this genocide, unlike previous genocides, which were genocides that the perpetrators tried to hide, the perpetrators in this case actually brag about it and are very proud of it and want publicly saying what they wanted to do and how they wanted to do it, for example, by denying food and water and medicine and so on. The third aspect, and this also gives us leverage to act, for example, legally and in other ways, as is happening at the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court. The third uniqueness about this is done in the age of the internet, where people are even documenting their own genocide. This again can be considered unique. Some aspect of it is negative, but some aspects of it is positive. in this age of the internet allows us, as you see now, we have 1,800 people who logged in to hear this webinar. So this allows us a lot of leverage to use these tools to fight, basically as they use the tool to fight us. Even artificial intelligence, which they use to commit genocide, we can use artificial intelligence to resist. The fourth unique feature about this is that this is happening in the 21st century when we have technologies of mass killings that is unprecedented. And this is very dangerous, by the way. We're getting close, according to the world clock, nuclear wars and so on, which could end civilization very quickly. So previous genocides did not precipitate a global calamity that could end civilization. This genocide could end civilization. That's a unique aspect. And also this gives us some leverage to use in our communication, to use in explaining to people why it's in their interests. And I think they are getting it. And that's why you see, for example, in faraway Sydney, 300,000 people go out on a demonstration. The fifth and final point of uniqueness for this genocide is it's accompanied by Guinness Book of World Records record of lies. The genocide is accompanied by a veriticide, as I call it, a death of truth. That's why Israel has killed 240 journalists in Gaza. They're trying to bury the truth. But again, this fifth item is the same as the other items. There are aspects of it that we can use for our leverage to resist and to move the media in this direction. And finally, from my own background of environment, there's of course an ecocide that's happening. I wish we have time to talk more about this. We publish papers on it. For example, how much tree cover in Gaza is destroyed, how much habitats of species here in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip are destroyed by the colonizers. This is not unique to this colonization, so I didn't list it among the 5 other things. All colonizers damage the environment. Israel actually produced more greenhouse gases from bombings, just from jet fuel alone, more than, for example, Poland produced from all its sources, like gas and kitchens and automobiles and so on. And this is just jet fuel alone. So there's a genocide, there's a veriticide, there's an ecocide, there's a medicide, destruction of the medical services. There's a scholasticide. We published a paper on the destruction of the educational system in Palestine, going back to beginning 1948, beginning of the destruction of our educational system. And this is continuing with the destruction of all the universities in the Gaza Strip. I will stop here because you gave me 7 minutes only, and it's already 7 minutes. And we can talk about other things. We welcome you to come to Palestine, of course, and engage with us. I would welcome you to come visit our institution in Bethlehem or volunteer here. Our website is palestinenature.org, and you can email me at info@palestinenature.org.
Thank you so much, Professor Kumsia. Just a notification, unfortunately, the live stream on YouTube has not worked, but we are nonetheless recording this webinar and we'll be uploading it to YouTube afterwards. For any of those who have got friends or colleagues trying to watch it on YouTube, the room is not yet full, so you can actually join directly on the webinar. We have also, unfortunately, lost technically Professor Richard Falk, who I've been trying to communicate with, but is available, but somehow isn't making it to a panelist. So we're going to go straight to Craig Mochiber. Please take the floor, Craig. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Usman, and everyone who's been involved in the call for protection. Usman and everyone at Protect Palestine, Jill Stein and Marco Bruno at the Green Party USA and Lifeline for Palestine, Eric Rubin and everyone at People Against Genocide Everywhere, Richard Falk and my colleagues at the Gaza People's Tribunal, journalist Sam Husseini, who's been demanding these kind of action for years now, and PNGO, Pingo, the network of Palestinian movements and civil society groups who are on the front lines, who have made this call and whose agency as voices of the Palestinian people we are all bound to center and to respect. And so many others have been beating the drum of protection for the Palestinian people from apartheid and genocide and for their liberation from the Israeli regime. And thanks to all of these terrific panelists today as well. So let me begin with a fundamental truism. The Israeli regime will not end the genocide in Palestine of its own will. The regime, the majority of its people, its proxies and lobbies and sponsors in the West are fully committed to the genocide and to the destruction and erasure of every remnant of Palestine from the river to the sea. And Western governments like the US, UK, Germany, and others, and too many other complicit states in the region are fully dedicated to the cause of Israeli impunity. That means that genocide and apartheid will only end through resistance against the Israeli regime, the steadfastness of the Palestinian people, the solidarity of the rest of the world, and the isolation, weakening, defeat, and dismantling of the Israeli regime, as it was in apartheid South Africa. This is a long-term struggle. But what can we do now? There are things we can do right here and right now. Things, of course, like boycott and divest and sanctions and demonstrations and disruption and civil disobedience, education, prosecutions under universal jurisdiction, civil cases against Israeli perpetrators and complicit actors in our own societies. And yes, we can also demand intervention and protection for the Palestinian people. Now, don't be fooled. There are many proposals for intervention, but some of these are not about protection of the Palestinian people, let alone their liberation. Some have called for weak, toothless civilian monitors for Gaza, but there have been human rights monitors in Gaza for decades, before and throughout the current genocide. Others have called for a so-called stabilization force, not to protect the Palestinians from the Israeli regime, but rather to keep an eye on the Palestinian resistance, to restore the cruel status quo ante that existed before October of 2023, with the caging of the Palestinian people and their slow, systematic annihilation. The normalization of the status of the Israeli regime and the resuscitation of Oslo by creating a new smokescreen with a kind of Oslo 2.0, a two-state solution where Palestinians, somewhere down the road, where Palestinians are told they have to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor, as their rights and land are continuously eroded and the regime's status is solidified and normalized. And then there's Donald Trump floating the idea of a US occupation and colonial domination of Gaza, revealing once again just how deluded and demented an emperor he really is. Finally, even the Israeli regime itself has suggested the deploying of a proxy occupation force manned by forces from Arab states that collaborate with the Israeli regime, another dark fantasy of the genocidal regime. Let me talk about the UN options. That brings us to the United Nations, and the UN, I have to say, has much to answer for in this genocide. Some in the UN have been absolutely heroic, like the UNRWA workers, who have been murdered in their hundreds by the Israeli genocide, many along with their families. The other humanitarians have continued to work to relieve the suffering of the people of Gaza in the face of enormous risk. The International Court of Justice, which has issued historic decisions affirming the rights of the Palestinian people in the face of enormous pressures not to do so. The special rapporteurs like Francesca Albanese, who have endured 2 years of smears and slander and harassment and death threats and US sanctions. And the political side of the UN is another issue, though, because some, like the Secretary General, his senior advisors, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the senior political leadership, they have failed miserably, not because they could not do more, but because they chose not to do so. And of course, the enduring symbol of UN failure is the Security Council. There are Security Council scenarios. Let's look at them quickly. As everyone knows, the Security Council has the power to deploy an armed force, and it has the power to impose that force even against the will of a country under Chapter 7. But given that the US, the UK, and France, all complicit states, have veto power in the Council, there are only two possible outcomes from the Security Council. One, a mandate that pleases the United States as Israel's proxy, and therefore the terms of which would be framed in a way that is disastrous for the Palestinians, or a veto of any force that would actually be helpful. So we know that the UN Security Council is deadlocked by the US veto, but here's the point. The world does not have to surrender in the face of that veto. The United Nations General Assembly that will meet in September is empowered under the Uniting for Peace resolution to act when the Security Council is unable to act owing to the veto. And taking such extraordinary action has never been more urgent. A UN General Assembly resolution adopted under Uniting for Peace could call on states to adopt comprehensive sanctions and a military embargo against the Israeli regime. It could withdraw the UN General Assembly credentials of Israel. It could mandate an accountability mechanism like a criminal tribunal to address Israeli war crimes, crimes against humanity, apartheid, and genocide. It could reactivate the UN's long-dormant anti-apartheid mechanisms to address Israeli apartheid. And, for purposes of this conversation, most importantly, it could mandate an armed, multinational UN protection force to deploy to Gaza at the request of the State of Palestine to protect civilians, open entry points via land and sea, facilitate humanitarian aid, preserve evidence of Israeli crimes, and assist in reconstruction. All of these actions could be adopted by the UN General Assembly with a 2/3 majority. And since Palestine has requested an intervention, no Chapter 7 action by the Security Council is needed to deploy a protection force. Very importantly, as affirmed by the recent World Court findings, Israel would have no legal right to refuse them. The court has affirmed that Israel has no authority, no sovereignty, and no rights in Gaza or in the West Bank. The process is very simple. A proposal is vetoed in the Security Council. That's inevitable. Secondly, states call for an emergency special session in the General Assembly under Uniting for Peace. Also easy, as Emergency Special Session 10 is in a session that can be resumed with a simple request. Third, a resolution is proposed by one or more sponsors in close consultation with the State of Palestine. This is also entirely possible unless the representative of Palestine somehow relents, and politically doable. Fourth, the resolution is adopted with 2/3 majority. This too is possible based on previous votes in the General Assembly. Fifth, the Secretary General is instructed to solicit troop contributions from countries. This is standard practice, and here's where pressure for states from across the globe to donate troops becomes very important. Finally, the mission is assembled and deployed. That's technically very easy. It is politically very challenging. But legally, there are no hurdles. The rules allow this, and there are precedents for it, like the 1956 UN emergency force that was deployed by the General Assembly to the Sinai. And judging by previous voting, a 2/3 majority is possible. Not guaranteed, but very possible. Now, you can be sure that the United States and the Israeli regime will do all in their power to obstruct the UNGA process and the deploying of the mission. But they don't have a veto. And that's the difference. This takes only political will and a political mobilization. It requires a step-by-step strategy. First, present the resolution and force states under the glare of public exposure to vote for or against a force to protect the Palestinians from genocide. That means states that have been hiding behind the US veto, saying, well, we tried, but they vetoed it, unfortunately, knowing that the Security Council is not going to act. They will be exposed, and they will have to either say we support protection for Palestine or we do not. Then you deploy the force by air, land, sea. You use all diplomatic avenues to ensure that it can be deployed to press the regime and its Western backers to stand down. And if they are blocked, the force could pre-deploy, for example, to Sinai and carry out remote monitoring while the pressure continues. So in other words, the world has not done all it can do to stop this genocide, and it has to try. Now, we're not naive. Success is not assured, but failure is guaranteed if we don't try. And time is of the essence. Genocide is raging in Palestine, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank. Famine has been declared this week in Gaza. Israel is expanding its military presence and appears to be poised to provoke a wider war with Iran. And September 17th, 18th, right around there, will mark the end of a one-year deadline set by the UN General Assembly for Israel to comply with their demands and those of the World Court or face so-called further measures. That means the time to act is now. This can be done, and we have to at least try. Thanks, Usman.
Thank you so much, Craig. We're going to go straight to Dr. Zani. We don't, in the end, have Professor Falk with the panel yet. We're still trying to resolve that. But to everyone who is participating, remember there is a 1-hour workshop, which you will be given the link to in the chat box, where we can feedback and discuss what we've been talking about here. So please look out for that. Dr. Manzani, you have the floor.
Thank you, Osman. Thank you to all the participants and audience watching the webinar. Just a couple of things, because I'm not a legal expert or have any expertise on UN mechanisms, and so I'll stay away from the law and the UN. But I'll take a look at the historical cases where genocides were effectively put to an end. A couple of cases, not necessarily to save the people that were subject to genocides, but by the intervening external power, feeling their interests are being hurt by the perpetrating state next door, usually. The two cases in Asia in particular. One is the 1971 internal conflict between East and West Pakistan that turned into a rather vicious, genocidal atrocities perpetrated by East Pakistan. West Pakistan, today's Pakistan, against East Pakistan, today's Bangladesh. The casualty rates were estimated, the minimum 300,000 in a span of about 7 or 8 months. And then there were mass rape by West Pakistani troops. There was a famous and infamous and chilling order issued by the head of the West Pakistani army. I want the land, not the people. You see, that's what we are seeing in Gaza. Israel wants the people. Sorry, the land, not the people. So they're trying to figure out what to do with the people, that they're killing as many Palestinians under total siege as possible, using multiple methods that the SS and the Nazi military have used, and Israel has gone beyond. The second case is India intervened in December 1971. The war started in March the same year earlier, and India resorted to deployment of air, land, and sea forces against East Pakistan, including attacking East Pakistan, the military and air force bases themselves. It ended within a very relatively short frame, 2 or 3 weeks, and then the West Pakistani troops in Bangladesh, or country that became Bangladesh, surrendered, right? And then, you've got a new republic was born as a Republic of Bangladesh, and then you've got the 1970, 78, 79 military intervention, which ousted the Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge from Phnom Penh by Vietnam, backed by the dissident groups led by Hun Sen, the longest-serving autocratic leader of Cambodia post Khmer Rouge. That also was triggered not necessarily to save the Pol Pot's, the killing 1/3 of the total population of Cambodia, Khmers, and the other Muslims, as well as Vietnamese minorities. And then that one also took place in 1978 December, and by the first week of January, Khmer Rouge was ousted. But what's interesting was, these two, post-genocidal regimes in Phnom Penh and Dhaka in Bangladesh, they were not recognized or easily supported by the Western powers because the intervening military powers were allied with the the Soviet Union at the time. This was 1971 and 1979, so still deep in the Cold War the era. And instead, the United States and United Kingdom team up with China to keep the ousted Pol Pot regime as the sole legitimate leader of the Cambodian people at the United Nations for the ensuing 10 years. Yeah. And that's after the fact that close to 1.8 million Cambodian people perished under this regime. The US and UK continue to support Khmer Rouge and its seat at the United Nations. And so those are two cases, and that involved a full-scale invasion of basically the country where the mass killings were taking place. In the case of Bangladesh, an upward of like 10 million Bangladeshi or East Pakistani people took refuge in India. And that was one of the major reasons that India decided to intervene, in addition to the fact that these are two historically hostile countries since the partition in 1947. Finally, in the case of Gaza, when we say protect Palestinians, we're talking about essentially fighting Israel. Yeah. Because Israel's goal is to exterminate as many Palestinians as possible with the ultimate goal of a large number the massively deported across the Egyptian and other borders. And so when we say protect the Palestinians, fight IDF. Well, IDF is armed and patronized and protected by the United States. So what we have is a scenario where the United States and its imperialist might, financial, media, and military and technological might are used to protect the perpetrating state. This is not to mention the two American poodles in Europe, the United Kingdom and Germany, going with the United States, punishing, those of us who seek to oppose the genocide using national law. Law has been instrumentalized to punish those oppositional voices and dissidents within UK, Germany, Europe, not to mention the United States. So we have a rather severe scenario, unprecedented in modern history, where Zionist fascism has captured imperialist states of the West, including settler colonial states of Canada, Australia, and to a lesser extent, New Zealand. So I think the nature of the state in Israel, it used to be conceived and operationalized as a dependency of first the British colonial power, and since 1943 onward, US emerging US imperial power. So we have a scenario today, this parasitic entity that we called Israel, not the Jewish people. I'm using the word parasite to refer to a political state, a European implant with manifestly fascist, racial supremacist ideology, having captured the most powerful imperialist state in the world and shaping and dictating the behavior of that state. So this is unprecedented. Finally, we have this nature of the state, which is biblically fascist, armed with an upward of 400 nuclear warheads, protected and armed and financed by the most powerful imperialist actor. So we are against that scenario, not just the Israel. So I think this is, the protect Palestine is a worthy idea. Prayers and nonviolent chants and sit-ins have proven to be only having limited impact. We should seriously consider starting IDF hunting units around the world. You don't need the UN General Assembly or Security Council. Think about it, hunting IDF, the same way Nazis were hunted by Simon Wiesenthal Center and others. We need to start thinking of things that we as citizens and civil society groups can do. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zani. We still, unfortunately, don't have Professor Falk, and so but we do, fortunately, have additional now 22 minutes for as long as Susan is able to talk as much as she wants for the rest of this hour. You are our final speaker, Susan. Please take the floor.
Thanks, and I love that suggestion for International Hunting Force. So I'm going to talk about the psychology of this moment that we're in, and I'm going to blow through a lot in the interest of time, but I hope that folks can at least use the contours for further discussion and organizing. I'm going to start by stating what I believe is driving Israel at this moment. And to do that, you have to understand or at least be attuned to Israeli internal discourse over the years. In general, there has been a persistent lament in Israeli society at all levels and across the full spectrum of their social, economic, political, academic, professional, and religious lives that deeply, deeply regrets the fact that Ben Gurion did not, quote, finish the job. And this lament has continued to be echoed in subsequent so-called missed opportunities to fully ethnically cleanse the land and effectuate the Zionist dream of greater Israel and further colonial imperial expansion into more Arab lands. And one of the things that underpins this regret in Israeli society is the fact that history has proven to them that no matter how badly they behave, how barbaric and cruel they are, and no matter how much pressure they feel in the moment, their propaganda will eventually wash away their crimes, that people will move on and they forget. And that's what they count on. That's what they're counting on in this moment. And these are lessons that they have internalized from experience of getting away with atrocities over and over and over. And now they're pushing through what they believe is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to steal prime land that comes with a vast natural gas resource worth trillions of dollars, and to simultaneously obliterate the indigenous Palestinian population that they've been trying to get rid of for 75 years. Netanyahu is at the tail end of his life, and he knows that it's now or never. So decades of experience tell them that the world's condemnations right now are meaningless, that they can do whatever they want, and when the dust settles, they'll just pour money into new PR campaigns. Their stenographers at the New York Times and other major outlets will reframe history. They'll buy new politicians. They'll put out dozens more Hollywood films and television series that overtly and subconsciously exonerate them and paint their victims as villains. And they'll indoctrinate a whole new generation that will not remember or care about this horrific moment in history, as they have done in the past. And that's what they're counting on. And they're counting on all of you, on all of us, to remain paralyzed, to be floundering in this theater of words and performances of concern. So no matter the amount of our protests, nothing is going to deter this genocidal Jewish supremacist death machine ultimately, unless it has real teeth. And the past 2 years have already proven that. We have watched the absolute catastrophic failure of every peaceful, every diplomatic, every legal avenue, all of which have been deliberately sabotaged by Israel and the United States. And so now inaction is not neutrality. It is not diplomacy. It is not self-preservation. It is complicity. It is surrender of your agency as peoples, as nations. It is a subordination of your moral compass and your very humanity to a fleeting political expediency. And eventually, your inaction now will prove to be your subjugation and perhaps destruction in times to come. Colombian President Gustavo Petro understands this. He recognized this, and he summarized the implication of this moment perfectly. He said, Gaza is a rehearsal of the future. He said it is a preview of how powerful nations will respond to challenges from less powerful ones, particularly in the global south. He said the Holocaust in Gaza is an experiment carried out by rich, great powers to demonstrate what they will do and what they will get away with against anyone who refuses to bend to their will or relinquish whatever they demand. Nothing Israel does is random. In collaboration with Europe and the United States and sycophantic Arab leaders, their behavior is calculated to a T, and it adjusts according to scientifically studied and theorized psychological models of control, corruption, colonization, and subjugation. The methods that are used to subjugate and control lions and other powerful forms of life for circuses are not very different than what they employ to subdue and break whole nations and whole societies. When you become familiar with psychological concepts like learned helplessness, the boiling frog principle, the schoolyard bully phenomenon, and the bystander effect, the reality that we are in will crystallize for you in the fullness of their nefariousness. We don't have a whole lot of time to delve into these, but I want to touch on them very briefly because I think you will recognize, you will see ourselves and you'll see the world reflected in them. Learned helplessness emerged from these cruel electric shock experiments that were conducted on animals, wherein the animal is programmed to believe that no matter what they do, whether they run, protest, beg, cry, nothing will stop the painful shock from ripping through their bodies, until the animal just lays there and takes it, one blow after another, after another, after another, normalizing this horrific violence. Israel follows this to a T. They commit a heinous crime, they watch the shock and outrage from the global public, and then they follow it up with an even greater crime. And the end result is an exhausted world that begins to believe that nothing we do, no matter how hard we try, how passionately we believe, that we are powerless to materially change the outcomes. And thus the overwhelming violence becomes normalized and a sense of powerlessness is internalized. And I know I don't need to give you all examples. It's there for all to see. And the corollary to this concept of learned helplessness is the boiling frog principle. And I know, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but basically, if you drop a frog into boiling water, the frog will jump out immediately. But if you put it in a pot of room temperature water and then slowly bring it to a boil, the frog will not perceive the danger and will eventually be cooked alive. This slow incremental escalation of violence is intentional, and it is calculated precisely to prevent what we're trying to do. It is calculated to prevent a collective breaking point that would trigger a unified fight response. Israel's occupation of Palestine has been a 75-year slow boil. So this brings me to the schoolyard bully phenomena that I know that you don't need that explained to you, but there are some hallmarks of this well-studied phenomenon in psychology. The bully intentionally escalates in stages and increments to avoid triggering a massive unified resistance, which is what we're trying to do here. The bully aims to inspire fear and seek dominance by targeting the most vulnerable and maximizing cruelty where resistance is least likely. We see this in Israel's specific targeting of children and unarmed, defenseless people. We see it in the pogroms committed by Israeli settlers backed by soldiers against whole families. And of course, we see a completely different behavior from them when someone is actually able to fight back, like Iran. The bully escalates their violence not just to maintain dominance, but also to push the limits farther and farther every time they get away with something. And they will never be content until someone stronger or a unified group finally stands up to them in a meaningful way. We see this play out over and over with Israel. They're caught doing the unthinkable, condemnation follows, and then they respond by doing something even more unthinkable. And the point is to make it clear to all of us that no matter how much you protest, we will do worse. We will cross all your red lines, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then another hallmark is to gaslight and blame the victims. And this also needs no examples. We all know that, we all see it. And the point here is not to convince people, but to sow doubt among the global community and to psychologically break their victims and break their detractors. And then the final hallmark of the schoolyard bully is to reward compliance and obedience by refraining from targeting the obedient, at least until the bully changes his mind. And the point here is to teach the oppressed people that resistance leads to immediate and severe suffering, while submission will delay, or possibly, if you're lucky, omit your suffering, all at their whims. And, you know, we can see this happening in Lebanon and in Jordan in particular. And so this is where the other concept, the bystander effect, comes into play. This is a social psychological phenomena that states that individuals are less likely to help a victim when other people are present. So basically, the responsibility to act becomes diffused. And on a global scale, we see this playing out where every country watches another country waiting for others to take action. And it creates a paralyzing feedback loop of inaction that the aggressor, that Israel, are crucially depend on. And so, of course, the Holocaust in Gaza is the most blatant example right now. The whole world is seeing the slaughter, the starvation, the inhumanity, the utter sadism. And they look to the United States, to the United Nations, which is completely neutered by the United States. Arab countries look to each other and then collectively to the US and to Europe, and the rest of the world just hopes that by staying passive and not rocking the boat, that they're going to be spared Israel's wrath or political retribution from the US. And so each country is watching others do nothing, and that has their own inaction reinforced. So that's where we are now. And it looks bleak, it sounds bleak, and it is, but it is not, and it doesn't have to be the end of history. There is a way out, not just for Palestine, but for the whole of the moral majority of humanity to finally break free from the yoke of a colonial elite that has been playing chess with all of our lives in one way or another, forcing us all now to watch what our minds can scarcely comprehend. That is violence that is being inflicted on a captive, defenseless, indigenous civilian society. And while Israel might be scandalized by the images that are coming out of Gaza, they want you and me to see them. This is the experiment. This is the programming of learned helplessness. The works of Frantz Fanon in this area are intellectually seismic events that are most relevant to this conversation right now and the decisions that must be had at this hour. He laid it out for us, that the most insidious shackles that bind us are those within our own minds, both as individuals and as nations. We are speaking, even now, this workshop, we're speaking within the confines and the contours that have been put in place by a tiny group of humans who have created this world order that none of us had a say in, a world order that rigidly divided us into civilized and savage, good and evil, first world and third world, advanced and emerging. This language is insidious and it frames our thoughts and even our imaginations, and that's the point. Frantz Fanon offered us a pathway to respond in ways that are also undergirded by scientifically studied and theorized psychological models of national and personal liberation, of decolonization, and of triumph. He argued, and please hear this, every syllable of this very clearly, that decolonization must be a violent and collective rupture. This rupture is meant to shatter the individual hope or the individual country's hope of mercy from the colonizer or the aggressor, and to replace that with a collective will to seize freedom, to seize agency, and to seize sovereignty. It is a path that forces us to recognize that our fates are tied together, that none of us will be spared, and that our only hope is in a unified resistance. Our collective anguish before this ongoing Holocaust at this hour that we are watching in the fullness of its gore must be a deeply personal exploration of what it means to be human in the world today, in a world that is shaped by oligarchs and sadists, corrupt leaders, and an unfathomable reenactment of the kind of naked colonialism that we all assumed was relegated to the past. A colonialism that is complete with mass slaughter, incomprehensible gore, and the total stripping of agency, of identity, of history, the utter destruction of an ancient indigenous society by foreign colonizers who came to our land with their Torah in one hand and grenades in the other, stealing and killing and raping their way through history. A history that they then rewrite and replace with fairy tales that they turn into school textbooks as if it's truth. They see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, as I said, for them to consolidate unreasonable power. However, if we choose, this moment can actually be our once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for humanity to finally chart a just, kinder, more sustainable, more dignified human destiny for all of us. They put international law in place to serve their interests. I believe that. It's there to punish African and Arab leaders who stray too far from their political whims. It's there for leaders who dare to put their own interests of their people before the interests of this elite cabal. But when that system no longer serves them, as we are witnessing now, they just trash it like it's nothing. And they do that because it was always nothing for them. It was always meant to be a self-serving tool. And now they don't need it. They have artificial intelligence and they have death technology that no one dreamed of. They don't need the pretense anymore. Not as long as all of us remain compliant and paralyzed. And the only way this will end well for any of us is through solidarity and unified action, including economic, diplomatic, and most crucially, military action. It is only by matching their sadistic escalations with our own escalations of resistance, both in tactics and intensity. Fanon spoke of this, and the Palestinian resistance is a living example of what it means to refuse to live on your knees, to refuse to live in fear, to break the shackles of our minds, to escalate resistance whenever we can. They refuse to give in to exhaustion, hunger, fear, and threats, and overwhelming odds. But what's missing for them and for all of us is solidarity and unified action. So yes, we are asking we are asking countries to step in to save what little remains of Gaza and the rest of Palestine. But what you might not understand is that in doing so, you would be saving yourselves in the end as well. Thank you.
Still a little bit speechless, Suzanne. You finished exactly on a sentiment that I fully concur with. We're about to switch over now to the meeting room, but I just want to maybe echo what Susan has ended with, because I have not felt more liberated than in the last 22 months of being. I'm on trial in the UK for support of terrorism. I'm on trial for, I've lost previous jobs. I've had no money and I've never felt as liberated, because I have a total conviction of what we are. And I feel more human than I've ever felt. So it is a case of self-liberation. It really resonates with my experience over the last 22 months. And it's it's life's sweetest feeling is liberty, worth dying for. All right, everyone. We've never done this before. We had problems with the YouTube, but we are going to try to get everyone over now to a separate Zoom meeting room. There are 800 people on this panel, in the audience, sorry. So in the chat box, you will have seen, hopefully, I'm going to do it again, a link to a meeting room. Everyone should move over there. This recording is going to be closed now, and the next session will be recorded and not live streamed, but will be recorded. So thank you all. See you in a minute. We still haven't heard from Richard Falk.
He is in the call.
He is now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do want to hear from Richard Falk, because he was a panelist but couldn't make it onto the call. So we'll hear from Richard Falk first. Others, please start putting your hands up. There are people who have notified me already who I do want to hear from, who I will ask to speak. I see a couple of them have already put their hands up, but let's take Richard, if we can find him, please. Richard, are you here? Do you want to unmute yourself? Do we see him in the panelists? Oh. Hello. Okay, great. Professor Falk, everyone, please take the floor. We're now in the more informal meeting mode rather than the presentation mode, so please bear that in mind. But please take the floor, Professor Falk. I can't hear you. I don't know if you're on mute. Yeah, it looks like you're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you somehow. Okay, great. I think
Yes. Can you
yes,
hear me now?
great. Here we are. Please go ahead.
Good. Due to technical difficulties, I have the challenge of speaking without the benefit of having heard what others have said. And given my respect for those other speakers, I feel I'm at a big disadvantage. But let me begin by commending Project Palestine for initiating such a dramatic move, and one that seems to be responsive to a situation that is one of the greatest humanitarian emergency certainly of the 21st century, and perhaps of modern times altogether. And the challenge is how to find a political process that is sufficiently motivated that it can engage in a military intervention, a protective force that will create a corridor for humanitarian aid and perhaps a peacekeeping presence along the borders between Israel and Gaza. In the background are a series of legal factors. Among the most important is that the International Court of Justice, more than a year ago, concluded in a near unanimous opinion that Israel was so consistently violating the terms of its occupation as specified in the Fourth Geneva Convention on Belligerent Occupation, that it should lose the legitimacy of remaining present in Gaza, that it was given a year to withdraw. That year was up on July 19th, and the failure to withdraw, which was anticipated, was said to create a situation where the members of the UN and the UN had a legal obligation to implement it. And implementation in view of the defiance of international law by Israel, with the shielding of the US in particular, but other European and British breakaway colonies on the one side, create a situation where there is no alternative, in my view, to an effective rescue of the surviving Gaza population than a protective force with the capacity to ensure the much delayed and disrupted delivery of humanitarian assistance in the form of food and medical aid. The situation is now where the population is totally traumatized and also almost totally malnourished. So if the action doesn't occur immediately, the catastrophe may consummate itself before any kind of protective force can be brought into being. But what this civil society initiative does is to say the conscience of humanity is challenged as never before to mobilize in such a way as to create emergency pressures under the impact of a situation of urgency to overcome this situation. One further point I would make is that the UN, for all its limitations, has been creatively adaptive at various points in its history in meeting challenges. The Uniting for Peace mechanism and responsibility to protect are two mechanisms that can be brought into play. As well, Article 22 of the UN Charter enables the General Assembly to create subsidiary organs or undertakings that would have the technical capacity to shape a emergency protective force. So the obstacles, in my view, are not legal or technical. They are matters of political will, geopolitical blockages, and the failure to act in accord or in response to a situation of true human desperation. And the failure to act will cast a shadow over the future of humanity, and therefore we should all do all in our power to make the unlikely, which is the situation of a call for military intervention, we should do all in our power to make the impossible possible. Let me stop there.
I'm so glad that you were able to join, Professor Falk. Wonderful to hear you and to hear of your enthusiasm for the campaign. I'm going to talk as little as possible. We have so many people lined up. We're going to start with Lubna from the Greenwich Palestine Alliance, and then we will take Eric. So Lubna and then Eric, please.